Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
We are diving into something that is, I think, one of the most subtle yet just deeply insidious processes in the human experience, and that is self-alienation. And we are not talking about some grand dramatic breakdown here, not a huge crisis. We're looking at the quiet, gradual process where you wake up one day, you look in the mirror, and you realize the person staring back at you is, well, they're just the acceptable, well-behaved replacement for the person you actually are.
It's truly the silent killer of vitality, of authenticity. The sources you've shared with us for this dive, these incredibly deep philosophical and psychological analyses, they draw so heavily from existential giants like Dostoevsky, Kafka, Camus, Sartre.
The heavy hitters.
Oh, absolutely. And they frame this whole process not as a failure, which is how we tend to think of it, but as maturity, as adaptation.
Which makes it so much more complicated. So our mission today is, I think, really crucial. We're tasked with helping you, the listener, identify those silent moments of self-betrayal. The ones that were camouflaged and often actually praised by the world around you.
Yeah.
That opening hook in the source material it's just haunting. It describes this non-dramatic moment of realization so perfectly. It's that sudden, quiet understanding that you are still operating, you're still functioning in the world.
You're achieving goals.
You're achieving goals, you're hitting your KPIs, but you are living, but you're no longer yourself. And the change, this is the key, it wasn't sudden or violent. It was incremental, it was approved, and sometimes it was even lauded by the people in your life.
You're still meeting all the external demands. When you have the job, you have the mortgage, the relationships, everything looks good on paper.
Yeah.
You still go to work, you smile at exactly the right time, you say, what must be said in the meeting.
Right.
Externally, the world looks at your life and calls it stable, or successful, or simply good. But the sources point out that one crucial thing has just quietly vanished. And society, frankly, doesn't care that it's gone.
And that vanished element is what the source material refers to with this fantastic term, the original self.
The primal self.
That primal, unedited, utterly human person you were before you learned how to systematically manage other people's expectations and their reactions to you.
We really need to define this loss clearly because it is the absolute centerpiece of this entire dive. The original self it's the person you were before you learned to subordinate your own desires to the need to please others. It's the self before you learned to express yourself only correctly, only in the approved format. It's the self that didn't yet know the fear of judgment, the self that existed before it became the acceptable version.
In Western psychology, there are parallels, right? We might talk about the true self or the authentic core, something distinct from the social mask, the persona.
Exactly, it's that core. And if we want to force a confrontation with this loss, the source material immediately turns to Dostoevsky, who is, let's be honest, never polite.
Never.
He hits you with a sharp interrogation. He demands that you answer, do you still remember the last time you lived without calculation?
Wow.
And that question is just brutal because it immediately dismantles all the intellectual defenses we build up around this. It forces you to face what the source calls a shameful truth.
Which is?
The fact of long-term, slow-motion self-betrayal. And we hate that word betrayal, don't we? It's so harsh. So we find ways to camouflage it.
We absolutely do. And this is where the vocabulary of camouflage becomes so insidious, so effective. We take this deep, often really dark process of self-censorship, of self-mutilation, really, and we wrap it up in the most beautiful, socially sanctioned words possible.
Like what?
We call it maturity. We call it adaptation, wisdom, realism.
Think about how those words actually function in a real conversation. If you express a strong, unapproved emotion, let's say genuine passion or a sharp moral anger about something at work, a supervisor or a colleague might tell you, you need to be more professional.
Right. Let's be realistic here.
Exactly. You need to be more realistic. If you stick to an unpopular but principled opinion, you'll be told that. And these beautiful words, they hide the dirty process. They hide the fact that we have quietly learned to stay silent about what we genuinely believe.
And on the flip side, we've learned to speak loudly about what we no longer believe, but we know will be accepted.
That's it. That's the core tragedy we're exploring today. Our mission is to unpack the truth behind that chilling statement from the source. We don't lose the original self in one dramatic failure. We sell it, gradually, piece by piece, for the currency of social safety and stability.
And then we have the audacity to call the resulting hollowness maturity. Here's where it gets really interesting, because now we're moving into the subtle mechanics of how the self-betrayal is operationalized. how it actually works. Yeah.
It doesn't start with a bang, it starts with an adjustment, a small one. And the source brings in Kafka to help us understand the unique psychological landscape of this adjustment.
It's the Kafkaesque state of being.
Yeah.
And the sources describe it as living in a court without a judge.
A court without a judge.
Which is such a profoundly modern feeling. No one is explicitly accusing you of anything. You haven't committed a felony, you haven't broken any laws, but you constantly feel this low-grade pervasive guilt.
Why, though?
Yeah.
What are you guilty of?
Well, you're guilty for harboring thoughts that differ from the assumed consensus, guilty for feeling emotions that are inconvenient for the group, or just guilty for not conforming to some invisible standard that everyone else seems to just intuit.
That persistent, unnamed guilt, that's the thing that immediately pushes you into what the source calls the adjustment loop.
And the motivation is simple, it's rational, it's deeply human. You adjust to be less different, you adjust to exist easier. We're all wired to seek ease and inclusion, right? So if a slight modification of my personality makes the world stop criticizing me, I'm going to make that modification.
Of course. It's a survival mechanism.
Yeah.
But that's what leads us to that essential, really uncomfortable query posed in the text. It's the kind of thought only a child would dare to ask out loud.
What is it?
If everyone has to abandon themselves to live, then what is left behind?
Oof.
It exposes the fundamental lie we accept,
Yeah.
that adjustment doesn't cost anything, but it costs the entire self.
We tend to think about alienation as this, grand tragedy, something monumental, a breakdown. But the sources really emphasize that the most dangerous alienation isn't noisy. It's not a crime, it's not depravity.
It happens in these seemingly rational, small decisions that look like good sense on the surface. They look like the right thing to do.
And the source material actually breaks this down into 4 clear stages. It's like a progression.
Right, a roadmap to self-betrayal. The first step is the first time you stay silent, despite knowing, in your gut, that you are right.
Just a small moral crack, the meeting where you know the project is going in the wrong direction, but the boss is excited, everyone's on board, and you swallow it.
You swallow it, and then it accelerates to the second stage. The first time you smile, despite feeling completely disgusted by a situation, a person, a joke. You prioritize social grace over your own internal honesty.
That forced smile. We all know that feeling. Then the third stage is action. It's the first time you do something, a social activity, a professional maneuver, simply because everyone else does it. You completely override your inner moral compass.
And the final stage, the truly insidious one, is the rationalization. You start telling yourself, it's okay, it's fine, as long as I survive, it's okay.
That's the self-comforting lie. It's the cement that hardens the compromise. You convince yourself that the betrayal wasn't even a choice, but an unavoidable condition of existence. I had no choice.
And the outcome of this process is, well, it's vividly portrayed by Dostoevsky in his characters. They're always obsessing over how they are perceived. And the result is, you know very well how you must appear. You have the script ready for every social situation.
But you no longer have any idea who you are.
The mask is fused to the face. You can't take it off anymore.
This connects so perfectly to Camus's sense of existential displacement, that feeling of being a stranger to yourself. It's not just that the world feels meaningless, which is classic absurdism.
Right.
Here, the source suggests the alienation is deeper. It's because you are living a life that was meticulously constructed and managed by you, but ultimately a life you did not truly choose.
And the image the source uses for this is incredibly powerful. It's like looking at yourself as an actor, constantly editing your own self like a manuscript.
We become our own internal editorial board. We're just constantly cutting out the unsuitable parts.
Unsuitable parts being the strong, politically incorrect, or emotionally inconvenient thoughts and feelings. Anything that might rock the boat.
And we are doing this editing, this constant self-censorship, primarily because of what Sartre called the gaze of the other. We allow the presumed judgment of external society to define our entire existence. We essentially outsource our identity to a committee that doesn't even exist.
And this brings us to that deeply foolish but terrifying question. And it's terrifying because it's so simple. If no one is looking, who am I still?
If you struggle to answer that,
If you struggle, it reveals you have been living too long, based on what the source calls borrowed recognition. Your sense of self is on loan from others.
it's the fear that if that external validation is removed, the center of gravity just vanishes. The void is terrifying because the adapted self only knows how to navigate the social world. It has no map for the internal world.
And let's be really clear about what we've sacrificed in this deal. The The original self, that Brynjan Ngindi, was rough. It was stubborn. It held unacceptable thoughts and inconvenient emotions.
But it was alive.
It was alive. It was volatile, maybe, but it was vibrant. The adapted self, the version we meticulously present to the world, is polite, safe, suitable, and often demonstrably hollower. That hollow feeling is the emotional debt you've accrued from all those small betrayals.
The ultimate tragedy here, according to these philosophical texts, is not that external forces coerced us into this state. That would be too easy. The real tragedy is that we convince ourselves that this self-betrayal was absolutely necessary.
Necessary for our survival, for our happiness. We sign the contract willingly without a gun to our head. We trade true existence for safety.
And then we give that act the pleasant, socially acceptable name of maturity.
That internal negotiation, that constant justification for why the compromise had to happen, that is the engine that powers self-alienation.
So if these small betrayals start internally, what builds the external cage that keeps us there? We're moving into part 2, transitioning from that personal guilt to the pervasive societal roots of the issue.
Right, because if this alienation were only an individual failing, we wouldn't see it everywhere, right? It wouldn't be so common.
Exactly. The sources suggest that when an entire generation feels vaguely that they are living wrongly but don't know where the mistake is, that signals a highly effective social curriculum is at work.
A social machine. And that machine relies heavily on a key insight from Dostoevsky. People don't self-alienate because they are inherently bad or weak. They do it because they desperately, fundamentally want to be accepted.
We're social creatures. It's a basic need.
It is. And modern society, with its relentless emphasis on performance, on success metrics, on visibility, it exploits that need ruthlessly.
And this curriculum, this teaching, it begins really early, and it's taught in fragments. Alienation starts with simple lessons your parents or teachers give you. Be obedient. Then later, it's be suitable. And finally, the big one, be realistic.
And the source notes the key mechanism of suppression here.
Yeah.
Nobody lies to us outright. They just don't tell us the whole truth about the consequences of those behaviors. They don't tell you what you're losing when you become realistic.
The unspoken lesson is internalized so quickly. Certain parts of the self, the messy, the rough, the inconvenient parts, they have to be hidden away, or even amputated entirely if you want to belong.
And this is when the fragmentation of the original self really begins. This process leads directly to what Kierkegaard identified as a state of despair without realizing one is in despair.
That's such a chilling phrase.
It is, because you're not dramatically fighting or rebelling. You're just subtly, incrementally shrinking yourself to fit into a predetermined mold. It's a silent loss of soul that you mistake for peace.
In the moment of existential decision, it always boils down to that uncomfortable, almost naive question. If I am myself and I get rejected, what should I do?
And society's answer is clear and brutal. It's whispered through 1,000 channels. Fix yourself. You are the problem.
This is exactly how alienation gets packaged as advice, rather than what it is, which is a form of oppression. We hear these phrases constantly, often from well-meaning friends, mentors, bosses.
Oh, all the time. Be less sensitive.
You need to think more positively.
Be more professional.
Or the classic, don't overreact.
Now, hold on. Let me just push back on that for a second, because I think a listener might hear that and think, well, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Isn't being professional sometimes just necessary pragmatism?
Yeah.
Where do we draw the line between necessary adaptation like, say, wearing a suit to a job interview and actual self-betrayal?
That is the essential line we have to identify, isn't it? The philosophical source material doesn't condemn the suit. It condemns the compulsion to become the suit.
Ah, okay. That's a great distinction.
Necessary adaptation is tactical.
Yeah.
You wear the uniform, but you know who you are underneath. Self-betrayal is existential. You wear the uniform so long and so completely that you forget what you believe. Your mind starts censoring your own thoughts to align with the uniform's requirements.
So the key is that the repetition of all that advice teaches a very specific skill. Skill of hiding oneself to survive, and eventually that just becomes the skill of abandoning oneself.
And this cycle leads us right back to Kafka's Invisible Court. We internalize this judgment system where we don't know the precise violation, but we constantly feel the need to justify our own existence. We learn to only speak things that are permissible.
And only feel emotions that won't inconvenience others. And crucially, society doesn't forbid you from being yourself outright. That would be too obvious.
So it just makes the price of authenticity prohibitively expensive.
Exactly. You can be honest, sure, but you might lose the job. You might lose the easy path to promotion. You might lose the approval of your parents or your peer group. That high cost is the real deterrent.
And this gets to the deep emotional root of it all, which Camus recognized: the fundamental fear of isolation. Being misunderstood is painful, sure. But being ignored or not needed, that's far worse for most people. It feels unbearable. Camus called this loneliness in the crowd, where you have a social role, a function, but you completely lack a true identity that other people can engage with, honestly.
And to avoid that loneliness, we sign the silent agreement. It's an unspoken contract. It's sealed through swallowed words, through forced laughter at bad jokes.
And through the performance of saying, I'm fine, when deep down there are multiple urgent I'm not fine moments just festering inside.
This is Sartre's sharpest insight into self-deception, or what he called bad faith. It's not that people are unintelligent, it's that the truth of their chosen situation, that they're living a lie, or at least a highly edited version of themselves, is just too difficult to live with.
It makes you confront that terrifying question: if I stop living this way, do I have any other viable path?
And the horrifying answer is often, maybe not an easier one. Society, to be fair, is not actively forcing alienation on us with a gun. It's simply making the alternative non-alienation terribly lonely and economically insecure.
And to really solidify the trap, the most insidious part is that alienation is actively rewarded.
It is. Silence in a tough meeting is called wisdom.
Right. She has great judgment.
Conformity to trends is called maturity. Ignoring discomfort to maintain peace is called professionalism. The original self, on the other hand, offers risk, volatility, conflict. It does not offer immediate, pleasant rewards.
So the fragile human mind just quickly learns the lesson. Self-editing is a viable path to reward.
The sources highlight that people lose their core, not necessarily because of overt oppression, but because they prioritize peace and acceptance and safety. They postpone their truth indefinitely. The heavy punchline here is that self-alienation doesn't come from a dramatic single fault. It comes from thousands of small self-adjustments that society rewards and we celebrate as adaptation.
Okay, now we move into part 3, which feels like the psychological climax of this entire deep dive. At a certain point, the alienation process is complete. It no longer requires any external reinforcement.
Right. The social surveillance system has been successfully transferred inside the individual. We become our own warden. We are executing the policies of the external court ourselves.
This is the exact condition Dostoevsky specialized in studying. External coercion is completely replaced by internal self-censorship. You stop yourself before you speak.
You bend your thoughts before they're even fully formed. You start doubting your own feelings before you even allow yourself to believe them.
And the alienation becomes perfect precisely at the moment it stops feeling painful or oppressive. It doesn't feel like a compromise anymore. It just feels rational, mature, correct. It's just the way adults operate in the world.
And it becomes Kafka's jail without walls. The self-monitoring machine runs smoothly without a human jailer. The prison doesn't need physical bars because the bars are now installed permanently in the mind. They function as reflexes.
We start living life according to this invisible, unwritten list of don'ts. Don't be too sensitive. Don't think differently from the majority.
Don't ask difficult questions.
Don't show the ugly parts of yourself. And this list is known by heart, even though it was never officially circulated. It's cultural osmosis.
And when you pause and ask yourself that essential, probing question, who will actually punish me if I tell the truth about how I feel?
The source notes that the answer is usually no one specific. There's no boogeyman.
No. But the fear remains because the penalty isn't public shaming. It's the subtle but devastating loss of one's position in the eyes of others. It's the loss of belonging, which our brain perceives as a fundamental threat to survival.
This fear of the gaze, then, is the perpetual motion machine of self-alienation, as Sartre argued. The individual lives as if they are constantly watched by an invisible pair of demanding eyes, adjusting the self before the judgment even appears.
We preemptively edit ourselves for an audience that might not even be there.
And this internal policing leads directly to the fragmentation of the self. You are no longer one unified person. You become multiple distinct versions.
There's the hyper-competent, highly professional work version, the agreeable, non-challenging family version, the suitable, fun social version.
And then there's the faint, neglected version reserved only for yourself.
And that original primal core gets shoved into a dark corner. You visit it only briefly when no one is looking. And even then, we don't dare stay long because its presence is an accusation.
It reminds us of everything we abandoned to maintain the smooth functioning of the other versions. And the constant management of these multiple egos is it's exhausting.
This perpetual stage management is Camus's definition of fundamental alienation. Waking up daily to a smoothly functioning life, a life where you hit all your targets, yet you carry this deep, unshakable sensation that you are living someone else's life.
This forces the truly painful question: if I vanished today, who would remember the real me?
Not the title, not the role, not the curated image on social media.
But the core, messy me.
And the third major mechanism here is what the sources call continuous rationalization, or the infinite postponement of life. We are absolute masters of strategic delay. We don't tell the truth because it's not the right time.
We don't act on our deep desires because conditions are not sufficient.
We don't change fundamental behavior because everyone else is like this.
These reasons sound so smart, so pragmatic, but Kierkegaard pointed out that when you string them all together, they form a life of infinite postponement.
You are constantly preparing to live, but you rarely actually live. The original self, the authentic desire, it's all reserved for later.
When the economy is safer, when the kids are older, when we're more accepted, but later never has a specific date on the calendar, does it?
Never. And the final, most corrosive mechanism is internalized shame. We become masterful at shaming ourselves without needing any external help. We look at an authentic thought or a strong feeling, instantly judge it as unacceptable, and immediately begin self-correction and self-blame.
Dostoevsky understood that the deepest suffering doesn't come from being scorned by others. It comes from scorning yourself using the external standards of others. We accept these external, often superficial criteria as the internal truth about who we are.
Which begs that straight, uncomfortable question that slices through all the pretense. If I don't accept myself, whose acceptance am I relentlessly seeking?
And the answer is always so vague. Society, others, life. These faceless, amorphous concepts that nonetheless control every single small decision we make.
And that is the punchline for this internalized stage. Alienation succeeds not when society forces us to change, but when we start proactively changing ourselves, even when no one is explicitly asking anymore.
We become the zealous warden of our own primal self, ensuring that the unruly, authentic parts remain silent and compliant, all in the name of peace. So in part 4, the focus shifts. Alienation now moves beyond being a social or psychological process. It becomes the default state of existence itself.
Yeah.
We are now talking about the experience of living without being truly present or living without truly existing.
This is the Dostoevsky moment of profound disconnection. Living without being truly present. You fulfill all the motions, you eat, you work, you love, you exercise, but you are fundamentally not in the moment.
It's like reading aloud a script you neither wrote nor chose, yet you still feel this obligation to deliver a perfect performance.
And the sharp pain of self-betrayal is often gone by now. It's been replaced by a kind of chronic numbness.
Kafka's Endless Corridor perfectly captures this state of being. We are walking endlessly down career paths or life trajectories, but we have no idea what the destination is. There's no clear interrogator, no clear sentence.
Just the vague, persistent, low-grade feeling. I made a mistake somewhere. I know I did, but I have absolutely no idea how to go back and fix it.
That internal dissatisfaction manifests in an honest yet deeply avoided question. If I am living correctly, if I'm ticking all the right boxes, why do I feel so fundamentally empty?
And that question is avoided because it demands a complex, radical answer. An answer that might mean dismantling the entire, carefully constructed life you've built.
And the suffering, it becomes trivialized. It's not grand, heroic suffering, which would be easy to identify and maybe even get sympathy for. It's mundane.
It's low-grade, persistent discomfort, unexplained, physical exhaustion that sleep doesn't resolve, irritability without a clear target, a sadness without a compelling story to tell anyone.
It's living without the actual visceral sensation of being alive.
And Camus recognized this condition as the realization of the absurd, but specifically the absurd that stems from self-deception. It's not that life lacks inherent meaning, it's that the specific life you are living is no longer yours.
It's reasonable, it's acceptable, it's praised, it might even be successful by all external metrics. But there is this pervasive, unnamed internal void that busyness, entertainment, or even massive achievements can never seem to fill.
And the truly cruel question this state forces us to ask is the one that validates the alienation. If I were to vanish for a week, would this life still require me?
Not the function, not the role, not the salary that pays the bills.
But the specific, messy, authentic, original me. If the answer is no, the role is easily filled, it confirms the self-alienation.
Sartre defined the trade-off that creates this state so clearly. You trade radical freedom for guaranteed comfort, and the inevitable price of that stability and comfort is the loss of the sense of personal existence.
The alienated individual exists in two strictly parallel states. Externally, they are sheer function.
Internally, they are profound emptiness.
They dutifully fulfill every single expectation placed upon them. They perform their roles flawlessly, but they have completely lost touch with their internal landscape. They no longer know what they genuinely want or what they truly believe when that external pressure is removed.
This is what Kierkegaard called the deepest form of despair. Not the despair that comes from losing a job or a loved one, but the despair that comes from no longer being oneself. The self is physically present, highly functioning, but existentially absent from its own life.
And crucially, in this state of chronic numbness, people seek anesthesia, not truth. They look for ways to dull the senses so they don't have to confront the internal void that their functional life has created.
The sources detail the methods of modern anesthesia, and they are literally everywhere. Numbing by frantic, unnecessary busyness, making sure the schedule is always so full there's no room for reflection.
Numbing by shallow entertainment, like constant binge watching or endless scrolling on your phone. Numbing by chasing short-term superficial goals that provide a momentary dopamine hit, but no lasting satisfaction.
And finally, numbing by shallow relationships. Relationships based purely on roles and expectations, relationships that never touch the deep core of who you are.
The ultimate fear is silence and stillness. Silence is dangerous precisely because it exposes the buried self.
If you sit still and do nothing, the terrifying answers start to surface. Unnamed sadness, repressed anger, abandoned desires, and that clear, penetrating question, when exactly did I lose my way?
Dostoevsky wrote extensively about the internal division that causes this exhaustion. These are people living two separate lives. One external life dedicated entirely to acceptance and performance, and one internal life dedicated purely to endurance.
This internal split causes profound chronic exhaustion. It's not physical weakness, it is the inability to sustain continuous, multi-front self-betrayal indefinitely.
And we find ourselves in the paradox of stability. The more we strive to be safe, predictable, and stable, the further we move from what makes us vibrant and alive. We become terrified of strong, genuine emotions, passion, deep desire, genuine anger, because they are inherently uncontrollable.
They threaten the meticulously acceptable facade we've built.
The original self is inherently intense and messy. When we systematically kill that intensity for the sake of safety, we extinguish our own internal life force. Alienation, the sources conclude, doesn't kill you immediately. It grants you a guaranteed acceptable life while slowly, systematically draining the sense that you truly exist.
Okay, let's get really practical now in part 5 by looking at the subtle, hard-to-see symptoms. Because when alienation is deep-seated, it doesn't present as a breakdown. It manifests as a sophisticated defense system.
Right. The focus shifts from where does it hurt to how can I efficiently stop feeling anything at all?
Dostoevsky described these as sophisticated sufferers. They are people who know intellectually that they are living wrongly, but they have built enough highly rational, socially acceptable justifications to continue. They function smoothly and politely.
So we need to look closely at these subtle signs in our own lives. The first symptom, unexplained fatigue.
And this is not the fatigue of hard physical labor or staying up late for a project. This is the profound exhaustion that comes from the constant effort of having to remain meticulously inside the mold.
It's identity management fatigue. You're tired from the continuous loop of censoring thoughts, checking emotions, and living for acceptable rather than true.
The question to ask yourself is, why am I still tired after a full 8 hours of sleep or a weekend of resting?
And the answer is because the rest is only physical. It doesn't address the true source of exhaustion, which is the continuous, never-ending process of self-denial and internal editing. The mind doesn't rest when it's constantly policing itself.
Symptom 2, false indifference or apathy. This manifests as the frequent use of phrases like, it's fine, whatever happens, happens, or it's normal, everyone deals with it.
This is not true composure. This is selective emotional paralysis. It's a sophisticated way, as Camus recognized, of adapting to a life that is no longer one's own by simply disconnecting the emotional wires.
The unmasking question here is critical. If I were truly fine, why would I constantly need to affirm that I am fine to myself and others?
The very insistence on one's own stability betrays the underlying fragility. It's a defense mechanism against genuine feeling.
Symptom 3, repressed anger. And this is rarely the explosive rage that gets you fired from your job. It's a quiet, corrosive anger eating you from within.
Anger at what, though?
Anger at being misunderstood, anger at having to be silent, anger at having yielded ground repeatedly for years. It's repressed because we are taught that anger is the ultimate indicator of being unprofessional or unmature.
So that powerful, necessary energy has to go somewhere.
Yeah.
It transforms into socially acceptable toxicity.
Exactly. It comes out as chronic sarcasm, relentless cynicism, contempt for others who dare to be authentic, or excessive self-mockery. Dostoevsky's famous Underground Man exemplifies this perfectly. Rational on the surface,
But full of unacknowledged inner fury that warps every single one of his perceptions and interactions.
Symptom 4, disconnection from true desire. This is a huge one. We stop knowing what we want. We only know what we should want.
Stability, early retirement, recognition, a certain kind of car or house.
Right. And when we achieve these socially approved goals, we feel a profound emptiness because the goals originated from external messaging, not from the authentic self.
That difficult, unanswerable question becomes the most telling signpost of all. If absolutely no one expected anything from me, not my boss, not my partner, not my parents, what truly would I want to spend my time on?
The inability to answer that question is a clear sign that the original self's voice has been utterly drowned out by years of external noise.
Symptom 5, fear of silence. And this is the fear not of being alone with other people, but the existential fear of being alone with oneself.
We fill every spare moment with noise, with content, with schedules, with plans, not necessarily due to actual necessity, but because silence creates the space for the buried parts of the self to surface and demand attention.
This is what Kierkegaard called avoidance despair. We fear confronting the truth of our own being and the extent of our compromise far more than we fear confronting the outside world. We use activity and noise as existential white noise machines.
And the final, most painful symptom. Symptom 6, subtle self-contempt. This isn't external bullying. It's a small, insidious, learned voice inside whispering things like,
You were weak. You were too much. You are not like others.
and the source of stress that this voice is entirely learned. We accept the world's judgment and we apply it to ourselves. And when we believe this voice, we start treating ourselves as someone who deserves to be controlled and managed.
We discipline ourselves not for genuine growth, but purely to prevent the original self from causing trouble. We end up living like well-trained, highly efficient, yet perpetually miserable operatives.
The ultimate achievement of alienation is not collapse. It's not a breakdown. It makes us function smoothly and politely, while the most vibrant, alive, and necessary part of us is imprisoned under the guise of maturity and responsibility. In part 6, the philosophical texts really force us to look beyond comfortable victimhood. It is so incredibly easy at this point to blame society, the structure, the family, the system entirely for our state.
It's the easiest path. But Dostoevsky denies us that specific comfort. The individual, he suggests, is both the victim and the accomplice of their own alienation.
There is never a moment in life with zero choice. There are only choices that induce profound fear and instability. The source uses Kafka's famous analogy here.
Right, the man from the country. People standing before an open door to the law, waiting their entire lives, not entering because they believe they're not allowed, even when the door is clearly visibly open.
The structure only works if we believe the door is locked.
Which leads to the sharpest, most uncomfortable question of all. If no one explicitly forbids me from living truly, then why don't I live authentically?
Yeah.
The alienation lies in accepting that the door is closed when it is, in fact, open. But it's terrifyingly open. Because crossing the threshold means confronting uncertainty and social rejection.
Sartre forces us to confront this psychological mechanism in what he calls bad faith. Bad faith is the state of denying your own freedom. We say, I cannot be different, I have no choice.
But the existential truth is, I fear the cost of being different. I choose safety.
And we have to be brutally honest about that cost. What are we protecting? We're protecting the loss of acceptance, the loss of financial safety, the loss of certain predictable relationships, and the loss of the familiar image that others have grown to rely on and love.
Alienation is an existential contract where we trade the original self for belonging. And the fine print on that contract says that with every renewal, every new compromise, the original self wears down further. It becomes weaker and less recognizable.
Society, we have to remember, doesn't actually require our perfection. It just rewards our predictability.
That's it. The original self is unpredictable, it's contradictory, it's often inconvenient, and it asks difficult, non-conforming questions. Society rewards the obedience of the adapted self because it's a stable variable, but it can never ever grant the feeling of being truly alive.
This is where Camus's idea of the small rebellion provides the path forward. And it's a path that doesn't require immediate resignation or moving to a cabin in the woods.
The first rebellion is not against the world's laws. It's refusing to live a life that is not one's own. And this rebellion is not grand or public. It happens in these tiny micro moments of integrity.
Like saying a genuine quiet no instead of nodding just to finish a conversation faster. Or staying genuinely silent instead of saying what you don't believe just to fill the conversational air.
Or, maybe the most difficult one, accepting being fundamentally misunderstood by someone you care about instead of performing an act just to be understood correctly.
The crucial insight here is profoundly painful. If I dare not bear the consequences of being myself, what exactly am I protecting?
In almost every case, we are protecting the stability of an already lifeless social ego, a role, rather than protecting the core self.
The existential thinkers demand honesty from us, not necessarily heroism. If your available freedom allows for only one honest statement per day, start there. If your freedom is only one small, non-performing decision that doesn't require justification to others, hold on to it fiercely.
Dostoevsky's belief is that one small, authentic act is worth more existentially than a lifetime of complete, perfect hypocrisy. Alienation dissolves not when we rage against the structure, but when we stop using that structure. The job, the relationship, the social expectation as a convenient excuse to abandon our own core being.
The structure may shape you, but only you decide if you will continue to betray the primal self. And finally, we turn to part 7, the path back. And we have to immediately dispense with the dangerous illusion that we can just return to the original self as if it were a lost possession that was never hurt.
Fyodor Dostoevsky would indeed offer a sorrowful laugh at the idea of a clean return. There is no path back to a pristine state. The only path forward is returning to the self in a state of knowing where and how one is broken.
The goal is not salvation or restoration of the past. It's the difficult, constant process of becoming true.
And the original self isn't some perfect lost angel. It's the part that dared to feel, dared to want, dared to speak, and dared to err before it learned that safety was paramount. Therefore, the first step is not action, it is radical acknowledgement.
This requires confronting what the Source calls the necessary shame. Not self-pity or self-flagellation, but confronting the hard truth.
Acknowledging the alienation, admitting the calculated choice of safety over honesty, and facing the reality that many of our rational decisions were, at their core, pure decisions born of fear.
Dostoevsky requires this confrontation before any true change can occur. We have to ask, if I dare not look at what I have functionally done to myself, what realistic hope can I have of saving anything? The truth must be faced in the light of day.
Step 2 is ceasing further harm. There is no need for a massive explosion or a public declaration of your new authenticity. Simply stop the small, daily acts of betrayal.
Don't say what you fundamentally don't believe. Don't participate in activities you despise. Don't force a smile when you feel deep disgust.
For someone who's deeply alienated, these small acts are massive acts of courage. Kafka described this as stepping out of the maze, not by finding the exit, but by simply stopping the self-driven impulse to go further in. You just stop doing what you know is false.
Step 3 requires enduring the new loneliness. When the performance stops, relationships that were based purely on your role, the agreeable colleague, the non-challenging friend, will inevitably waver or vanish.
Camus accepted this price. Honesty has an immediate social cost, but that cost is ultimately less cruel and corrosive than the continued falsehood of living a lie. We have to ask ourselves, am I afraid of losing others, or am I afraid of being left alone with the sound of my true self?
Step 4 is learning to listen to the uncomfortable parts of yourself. The original self does not speak in polite, organized language. It speaks through discomfort, through inconvenient anger, through sudden sadness, or through untimely, illogical desires.
The new path is to stay with these intense emotions and listen to them, not immediately repress them, recognize them, and simply acknowledge, you're still alive, you're still here. Dostoevsky believed only those who dare to live with their ugly, authentic, contradictory parts have any chance to become truly whole and integrated.
And step 5, building a small, true life. It doesn't need to be grand or world-changing or conforming to anyone else's standard of success. It just needs to be true to oneself.
A job that doesn't require you to betray your conscience daily. A relationship where performance is replaced by presence. time that doesn't require constant justification or productivity.
Kierkegaard saw this as the only truly meaningful existential act. Choosing oneself and accepting the burden of that choice, even if no one notices, and certainly even if no one applauds.
The final acceptance is perhaps the most difficult realization of all. The original self returns not to guarantee your happiness or your success. It returns simply to make you true. And true is not always comfortable, loved, or safe.
But the vital, unedited true can live.
The journey we've unpacked today is fundamentally about stopping the continuous, exhausting negotiation with yourself and with the external world.
And the process of self-alienation doesn't end when we manage to find the person we used to be. It ends decisively when we stop betraying the person we are.
We've spent a lot of time discussing the fear of the original self surfacing during intentional silence. So for the coming week, we want to leave you with a single, powerful challenge. Find a moment of intentional, non-productive silence, 15 minutes perhaps. Sit with yourself and ask,
What is the one unapproved thing, the thought, the desire, or the anger that is still lurking beneath the surface, ready to tell you that you are truly alive? Go find that thing and listen to what it has to say.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the cost of being acceptable.